Mercedes wants Lewis gone. So, for those of you named Patrick and who have been living under a rock, Lewis is going to Ferrari next year, 2025. And Mercedes actually wants this. Toto admitted in February that they kept Lewis's current contract short so that they would have the option to get a younger driver, specifically Kimi Antonelli, as everyone's been mentioning, for 2026. And after watching the Spanish Grand Prix this weekend, I think there's another reason that they want Lewis gone that I haven't heard anybody talking about. So, without further ado, let's get into what I think are the two main reasons that they want him gone, starting with the obvious one. Lewis is an aging driver. So, for as fast as he is, Formula One is entering a new era in 2026 that everyone is expecting to be powertrain dominated. And if you remember what happened last time Formula One was powertrain dominated, circa 2014, it turned out pretty good for Mercedes. So they're looking to set up themselves for this next era with some good long-term options, right? If Mercedes builds a grid washer in 2026, what they're going to want is two young drivers that are going to secure the next 7, 10 championships, 8 constructors in a row last time. Could they do it again? That's what they're going to be thinking, right? And they're not going to want a driver that's, maybe got 2 years, 3 years left in him, right? Because then if they miss out on a young driver, then they're going to be stuck with who knows who for 5 or 8 years when they might have a really really good car, right? And critically, George has proven that he can be just as fast as Lewis when it counts. So he's the perfect driver to have alongside a more junior driver for those beginning few years while they're figuring out the regulations. And I have no doubt that in Mercedes' mind, they're confident that George could deliver the results if, let's say, in those first, you know, 1, 2, 3 years of 2026, if they really do have a banger, I think Mercedes is confident that George can do that. If you look at George's results since he joined Mercedes, it's basically been 50-50. 2022, George took the championship by 35 points. 2023, Lewis took the championship by 59 points. And as of now, almost halfway through the season 2024, they're only 11 points apart. George is ahead, and George is actually up 8-2 in the qualifying. So I think it's clear their performance level is about the same. And so yeah, given Lewis's age, it almost doesn't matter which one you pick. So they're going to go with the younger driver. Now, the second reason I think Mercedes wants Lewis gone that I don't haven't seen anybody mention. I don't think Mercedes would openly admit this, but George is known for really aggressive wheel-to-wheel combat, right? George is known to not give an inch when it comes to racing, and he's had his fair share of accidents and criticism because of this. I honestly see Lewis and George together on a team almost like having Lewis and Max on a team. The way that George races and the way he just almost expects the other driver to get out of the way. He is really like Max in that way. And if you looked at Canada, second to last lap when George had to get repast Lewis, he had some, it was pretty spicy on that second to last lap. And this is when the car isn't competitive, right? So right now, the last 3 years, Mercedes has not had a good car, and so it's really easy to put on the team first attitude when that's the case, right? You've seen Lewis and George do the whole, oh, we're just so happy for everyone at the factory. I'm glad we got points. My teammate did really well. And it's easy to do that when they're scoring fifth and sixth on a good weekend, or you know, third and fourth. And, we've seen in the last 2 weekends, George gets on the podium, Lewis gets on the podium, but they're not necessarily fighting for wins, and they're certainly not fighting for championships. Uh, that being said, they are extremely close. And I think that's where the danger is. If you don't include Australia this year, where they both DNF'd, out of the 9 races, they finished 3 right next to each other, 4 with only one car separating them, and the remaining two with just two cars separating them. So again, they're very, very close almost every single race. And if Lewis was still next to George in the garage and 2026 comes around and they've got, the class of the field car, I could see that turning 2016 level rivalry just with the way that George races, Lewis's desire to get an eighth title. I don't think we've seen too much of it, but I if I was Mercedes, I just wouldn't trust that combination, right? If they get Whereas if they get a younger driver in that seat, for the first few years he's going to be coming up to speed. You look at Oscar Piastri, right? Oscar Piastri is quick, but he doesn't have the experience, the race pace, the tire preservation. So it's taken him a few years to come up to speed, and then by the time he comes up to speed, maybe George is uh, maybe he's starting to get older, maybe he's looking at other teams, that kind of thing. It just buys you some time. And so that's the second piece I think that Mercedes is probably not telling people is that one, they want Lewis out to get that younger talent in for the longer term of the next era of Formula One regulations. But two, I don't think they want George and Lewis together in the cars. If they have a competitive car that can actually win championships, I think that could be a bit of a nightmare. Now, there's two other things I want to address here. The first one is that some people are going to say swapping Lewis for a younger driver is also going to save them money, and that's just Mercedes is just not going to care about that. Okay, for one, driver salaries aren't included in the budget, so it's not going to affect their cost cap at all. Two, Mercedes is a very rich team; they're not a Haas or Sauber, right? They can afford it. And three, Lewis almost certainly pays for himself at Mercedes. If you look at what happened to Ferrari, when Ferrari announced that they signed Lewis Hamilton, their stock went up $7 billion, right? Mercedes has not paid Lewis $7 billion since they've had him, right? I mean, he's almost always going to be worth more than you pay him. So the money is certainly not a factor here. I have no doubt. And now, number two, you could say, well, couldn't you say this about any driver pairing, that if you give them a championship level car, there's a risk that they're going to fight, right? And I don't think that's the case either. In theory, yes, but that's only if both drivers have the same performance level and are both capable of winning the championship. And that's almost never the case, specifically for that reason, is you have the risk of that rivalry, and you end up risking the whole entire drivers and constructors championship by having your two drivers just fighting all the time, right? And I think that's what Mercedes is scared of here. If they have Lewis and George in the car, they're risking both championships, right? So putting a junior driver in it just kind of solves that problem for them. So those are my thoughts. Tell me what you think, and get subscribed if you want to see my analysis of the upcoming Austrian Grand Prix. It's a sprint weekend, so we've got sprint qualifying tomorrow. Super excited for that. I will see you guys in the next one.